The school bus had just pulled up to the curb like it always did, its brakes hissing as the doors swung open. Kids piled out, laughing and talking, backpacks swinging over their shoulders. But 8-year-old Maya wasn't running to the house like usual. She wasn't beaming with excitement about her day or telling her little brother about the funny thing that happened in class. Instead, she stepped off the bus slowly, her small hands gripping the straps of her pink backpack, her eyes scanning the front porch where her father stood waiting. David, her dad, had noticed it for a few days now. Something was off. Maya had always been a bubbly, talkative child. She loved school, loved her friends, and couldn't wait to share every detail of her day. But lately, she had been quieter, hesitant. She still hugged him when she got home, but her grip was tighter, lingering a little longer. When he asked how school was, she just shrugged and mumbled it was okay, before heading to her room. It wasn't like her. And today, as she walked toward him with slow, careful steps, he felt that familiar knot tighten in his stomach. "Hey, sweetheart," David greeted, kneeling down to her level. "How was your day?" Maya didn't answer right away. She looked past him, as if checking to see if someone was watching. Then, in a quiet voice, she said the words that sent a chill down his spine. The bus driver did it again. David's heart stopped for a second. His mind raced. Did what again? He tried to keep his voice steady, his face calm. He didn't want to scare her. "Maya," he said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder, "what do you mean?" She looked down at her shoes, kicking at the gravel. "I don't want to talk about it out here." That was all he needed to hear. Without another word, he took her hand and led her inside. His mind was going a mile a minute. He knew he had to stay calm, but every worst-case scenario was flashing through his head. He had seen too many stories on the news, too many situations where parents ignored the small signs until it was too late. He refused to be one of those parents. As soon as they stepped inside, David crouched in front of her again. "Sweetheart, whatever it is, you can tell me. You're safe here." Maya hesitated. She bit her lip, her eyes darting toward the front window, as if afraid someone might hear. Then she took a deep breath and whispered, "He keeps stopping the bus where he's not supposed to. He tells me to stay behind when everyone else leaves." David felt his blood run cold. His hands clenched into fists. His instincts screamed at him to act now, to do something. "Stay behind for what?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya shifted uncomfortably, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "I don't know. He just talks to me, asks me weird stuff, like if I have secrets." That was it. That was all David needed to hear. He didn't wait another second. His fingers were already dialing 911 before Maya had even finished her sentence. His hands were shaking with a mix of fear and fury. As the line rang, he wrapped an arm around his daughter, pulling her close. "You did the right thing telling me," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "I promise you, sweetheart, no one is ever going to make you feel uncomfortable again." The operator picked up. 911, what's your emergency?" David took a deep breath, steadying himself, but his voice was unwavering when he spoke. "I need to report a school bus driver. Something's not right, and I need someone to check it out now." Little did he know, the call he was making would uncover something far bigger than he ever imagined. David's fingers tightened around his phone as he listened to the operator's voice on the other end. He could hear his own heart pounding in his ears. Every second that passed felt too long. He wanted action. He wanted someone to tell him everything was going to be fine, that he was just overreacting, but deep down he knew he wasn't. "Sir, can you tell me exactly what happened?" the operator asked. David inhaled sharply, glancing at Maya, who was now sitting on the couch, hugging one of the cushions to her chest. She looked so small, so unsure. He softened his voice for her sake, trying not to let the fear and anger show. "My daughter just got home from school. She told me her bus driver has been making her stay behind after dropping off the other kids. She said he talks to her, asks her weird things." There was a brief pause on the line. "Has he touched her in any way? Threatened her?" David's grip on the phone tightened. "She hasn't said anything like that yet. But I don't want to wait to find out." "We understand, sir. We'll send an officer to your location to speak with you and your daughter. In the meantime, please try to keep her calm and ask if she remembers any other details. If you feel she's in immediate danger, don't hesitate to call us back." David let out a slow breath. "All right. Thank you." As he hung up, he turned back to Maya, his heart aching at the sight of her curled up so small on the couch. He had always promised to protect her, to keep her safe, and now he was questioning if he had missed something, if there had been earlier signs he should have noticed. He sat down beside her, keeping his voice gentle. "Baby, I need you to tell me everything you remember, okay? I just want to help you." Maya hesitated. Her fingers played with the hem of her shirt again, something she always did when she was nervous. "It started last week," she said softly. "At first, I thought it was an accident. He missed my stop and said he'd turn around, but then he didn't. He just kept driving. I got scared, but then he finally stopped and let me out." David's stomach twisted. "And that happened more than once?" She nodded. "Yeah. And then he started asking me to stay on the bus after the other kids left. He said he needed help cleaning up or something, but he never really asked me to do anything. He just talked." David forced himself to stay calm, even though every instinct in him was screaming. "What did he talk about?" Maya swallowed hard. "He asked about our house, if we had a dog, if my mom lived with us. He asked if I ever walked home alone." David's jaw clenched. This was more than just an over-friendly driver. This was something else. "Did he ever tell you not to tell me?" She nodded again. "He said it was just between us, that it wasn't a big deal." That was all David needed to hear. A knock at the door made them both jump. David stood quickly, checking through the peephole before opening the door to a uniformed police officer. He was a tall man, late 40s maybe, with kind but serious eyes. "Mr. Carter?" the officer asked. David nodded. "Come in." The officer stepped inside, his gaze shifting to Maya. He offered her a small smile. "Hi there, sweetheart. My name's Officer Reynolds. I heard you had a little trouble with your bus driver." Maya didn't answer right away. She just pulled her knees up to her chest, looking at her dad. "It's okay," David reassured her. "Just tell him what you told me." Slowly, Maya went through everything again. The missed stops, the strange questions, the moments she was left alone with the driver. Reynolds listened carefully, nodding as she spoke. When she finished, he let out a slow breath and looked at David. "You did the right thing calling us," he said. "We'll be contacting the school district right away to get information on this driver. Do you happen to know his name?" David shook his head. "I don't, but I can describe him. Maya might know his name." Reynolds turned back to her. "Sweetheart, do you remember what his name tag says?" Maya hesitated. "I think it says Mr. Daniels." Reynolds jotted it down in his notepad. "All right. We'll look into him. In the meantime, I'd strongly recommend not letting her ride that bus anymore." David didn't even have to think about it. "She's not getting on that bus again. I'll take her to school myself." The officer nodded approvingly. "Good. We're going to check if there have been any previous complaints. But just to be safe, if you notice anything suspicious, anyone watching your house, following you, call us immediately." David's stomach sank. The idea that it could be worse than just a creepy driver had his protective instincts kicking into overdrive. Reynolds handed him a card. "I'll personally follow up with you tomorrow. In the meantime, just keep an eye on her, okay?" David nodded, shaking the officer's hand. After Reynolds left, David locked the door behind him and turned back to Maya, who was still curled up on the couch. He sat down beside her and pulled her into a hug. "I'm so proud of you for telling me," he whispered. "No one is ever going to make you feel scared again." Maya nodded against his chest, but David could still feel the tension in her small body. He wasn't going to sleep until he knew for sure that this man, this Mr. Daniels, wasn't a danger to his daughter. But something in his gut told him this wasn't over. Not yet. That night, David barely slept. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the police officer's card, running through everything Maya had told him over and over again. His gut told him there was more to this than just strange conversations. Something was off. The way the bus driver had asked about their home, their routines. It felt calculated. Intentional. David had spent years working in security. He knew how to read people, how to spot red flags. And this situation had too many of them. He wasn't about to sit back and wait for the police to figure it out. Pulling out his laptop, he started searching for anything he could find about Mr. Daniels. It wasn't much to go on, but he knew the school district kept records of employees. Maybe there was something, a complaint, an article, anything that could give him more information. He typed, "Mr. Daniels, Springfield School District bus driver." A few links popped up, mostly standard school directory pages. Then he saw something that made his breath catch. Local bus driver placed on leave amid investigation. David's stomach clenched as he clicked the link. The article was from nearly 2 years ago. A bus driver, same name, same school district, had been placed on administrative leave after a parent raised concerns about inappropriate behavior. No charges had been filed. The school district had called it a misunderstanding. But now here he was again, driving, asking Maya strange questions, stopping where he wasn't supposed to. David felt his jaw tighten. How had this man been allowed back behind the wheel? He reached for his phone and dialed Officer Reynolds. It was late, but this couldn't wait. The officer answered groggily. "Reynolds, sorry to call so late," David said, keeping his voice steady, "but I just found something you need to see." Reynolds sighed, sounding more awake now. "Go ahead." David explained what he had found, reading off the details from the article. The officer was silent for a moment before speaking. "That's interesting. I'll check into it first thing in the morning. But listen, David, if this guy has a history and he's still working, it means someone higher up let it slide. Be careful. If he realizes you're looking into him, he might get nervous." David's grip on the phone tightened. "I don't care if he gets nervous. I just want to know my daughter is safe." "I hear you," Reynolds said. "I'll be in touch." David ended the call and rubbed his hands over his face. He needed to be smart about this. If this man had been protected before, there was no telling what he was capable of. The next morning, David made good on his promise. He drove Maya to school himself. She sat quietly in the back seat, staring out the window, her usual excitement about school completely gone. As they pulled into the parking lot, David noticed something that made his blood run cold. The bus. Bus number 214. The same one Maya rode every day, was already parked near the school entrance. And standing next to it, watching the students file inside, was him. Mr. Daniels. David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The man was tall, mid-50s maybe, with thinning gray hair and an average build. He wore sunglasses, but David could feel his gaze scanning the students, watching them. His posture was too relaxed, too confident. Maya shifted uncomfortably in the back seat. "Dad, can we just go in?" David forced himself to take a deep breath. He couldn't let her see his anger. "Of course, sweetheart." He parked, walked her inside, and didn't leave until he saw her safely in her classroom. But instead of heading back to his car, he stayed. He needed to get a closer look. Keeping his distance, David walked toward the bus. Mr. Daniels was still there, talking to another bus driver, laughing about something. But David noticed the way his body was positioned, still half facing the school, still watching. When Daniels finally glanced in David's direction, their eyes met for just a second. Just long enough for something unspoken to pass between them. Recognition. David saw it in his posture, the way his shoulders tensed for just a moment before he turned back to his conversation. He knew. Daniels knew David was watching him now. David clenched his jaw and forced himself to walk away before he did something reckless. He needed a plan, and he needed proof. That night, after Maya went to bed, David sat in the living room, deep in thought. His gut told him the police might take too long. He needed more. Then an idea hit him. The bus had cameras. If Daniels had been doing anything strange, the footage would show it. David grabbed his phone and called a friend, Eric, who worked in IT for the school district. "Hey man," David said when Eric answered. "I need a favor." Eric chuckled. "That's never a good sign. What's up? You guys keep surveillance on the buses, right?" "Yeah, they've got cameras." "Why?" David hesitated. He didn't want to say too much. "Something happened with Maya's driver. I need to see if anything was caught on tape." Eric's voice dropped. "David, that footage isn't easy to get. It's school property." "I know," David said. "But I also know they wipe the footage every few days unless there's a formal request. If I go through the district, it'll take too long. I just need to know if there's anything there." Eric sighed. "All right, let me see what I can do." "No promises, though." David let out a breath. "Thanks, man. I owe you." After the call, David sat back, staring at the ceiling. He was getting close, he could feel it. But something still wasn't adding up. Why Maya? Why had Daniels fixated on her specifically? David ran through every interaction, every possible reason, then something clicked. Daniels had asked about their house. If Maya walked alone. If they had a dog. He hadn't just been asking random questions. He had been gathering information. David sat up straight, his pulse pounding. This wasn't just about the bus. This man had been planning something. And David was running out of time to stop it. David barely touched his coffee the next morning. His mind was racing, his body tense. He kept checking his phone, waiting for a call from Eric about the bus footage. Every time the screen lit up, his stomach twisted. He wanted answers. Needed them. Maya sat at the table, poking at her cereal. She had barely spoken since yesterday, and it broke David's heart. His little girl, who used to sing in the mornings and tell him all about her dreams, was suddenly quiet. She was carrying something too heavy for her small shoulders. He forced a smile. "Hey, kiddo. You want to listen to music on the way to school today?" Maya shrugged. "Maybe." David reached over and squeezed her hand. "Everything's gonna be okay. I promise." She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. After dropping her off, David didn't leave right away. He stayed in the parking lot, watching the buses roll in, his eyes searching for Daniels. The man wasn't standing outside today. That made David more uneasy. Then his phone buzzed. "Eric." David answered immediately. "Tell me you found something." Eric let out a long breath. "I found the footage." David sat up straighter. David, it's weird. The guy doesn't do anything outright illegal, but it's the way he looks at Maya. The way he watches her. There's a clip from 3 days ago. After the last kid gets off, she starts to stand up and he stops her. Says something to her. She looks nervous. Then he just sits there for a full minute before finally opening the doors. David gritted his teeth. "What else?" "There's more," Eric said hesitantly. "I checked the camera from the outside of the bus. Last week after he dropped her off, he didn't drive off right away. He sat there, watching her walk home. For almost 2 minutes. David's blood ran cold. He was watching where she went. "Yeah," Eric said. "It's like he was memorizing her routine." David felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Can you send me the footage?" Eric hesitated. "I could get in serious trouble for this, man." "I get it," David said. "But I need proof. The police need something concrete." After a moment, Eric sighed. "I'll send it. But be careful." David ended the call, his hands shaking. This wasn't just a bad feeling anymore. This was real. He called Officer Reynolds. "I have proof." "What kind of proof?" "Bus footage. It shows him watching Maya. Waiting. He's planning something, Reynolds." There was a pause. "All right. I'll meet you in an hour." "Don't do anything reckless, David." David clenched his jaw. He didn't have time to be patient. An hour later, he sat across from Reynolds in a small diner, his laptop open, the footage playing. The officer leaned in, watching closely. When the video reached the part where Daniel sat motionless after dropping Maya off, his expression darkened. "That's not normal," Reynolds muttered. David's voice was tight. "No, it's not." Reynolds exhaled. "All right. This is enough for me to escalate things. We'll bring him in for questioning. In the meantime, keep Maya close. Don't let her out of your sight." David nodded. "I wasn't planning on it." As he drove home, a new fear gripped him. If Daniels realized people were closing in on him, would he act faster? Would he try something desperate? David wasn't about to take any chances. That night, he double-checked every lock in the house, set up an extra camera facing the driveway, kept his phone charged and within reach. Then, around midnight, his phone buzzed again. A text message. From an unknown number. "You should stop digging." David's stomach turned. He stared at the screen, his pulse pounding in his ears. Whoever sent this wasn't just warning him. They were watching him. And they weren't done yet. David's hands clenched around his phone as he reread the message. His pulse pounded in his ears, every nerve in his body on high alert. "You should stop digging." He stood up slowly, scanning the darkened living room. The only light came from the glow of his phone screen. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. He moved toward the front window and carefully pulled back the curtain, peering outside. The street looked empty. No cars lingering, no movement in the shadows. But that didn't mean no one was watching. His fingers hovered over his phone screen. Should he call the police? Tell Officer Reynolds about the message? Before he could decide, another text came through. "You don't want to make this worse for her." A sharp chill ran down his spine. Her. They were talking about Maya. David's breath came fast, his mind racing. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was a threat. Without hesitating, he turned on his security app, pulling up the live feed from his outdoor cameras. The front porch clear. The driveway empty. Then he switched to the camera facing the street. His stomach dropped. A car was parked a few houses down. Headlights off. The engine wasn't running, but David could see the faint glow of a phone screen inside the car. Someone was in there. Waiting. Watching. David's jaw clenched as he grabbed his keys. Enough was enough. Stepping outside, he kept his movements slow, controlled. If they were watching him, he wanted them to know he was watching them. The cool night air filled his lungs as he walked toward the sidewalk. He kept his eyes on the car. No movement. No attempt to drive away. Then, suddenly, the glow inside the car disappeared. The screen went dark. David took another step forward, his fists tightening at his sides. "Hey!" he called out. His voice was steady, but his heart was racing. "I see you." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the driver's side door swung open. A man stepped out. David expected to see Mr. Daniels. But the person standing under the dim streetlight wasn't the bus driver. He was younger, maybe late 30s, with a thin, wiry frame. He wore a dark hoodie, his hands stuffed in his pockets. His face was partially hidden in the shadows. "Go back inside, man," the stranger said, his voice low. "This doesn't concern you." David's entire body tensed. "You're threatening my daughter." "It concerns me." The man shook his head. "Nobody's threatening her. But you keep pushing, and you're gonna regret it." David took a step closer, his anger rising. "Who sent you?" The man let out a short, humorless chuckle. "Does it matter?" David clenched his jaw. "You tell Daniels." The man's expression flickered. It was slight, but David caught it. A reaction. He hadn't expected David to say that name. David pressed forward. "Yeah, I know. And I'm not backing down." For a moment, the man didn't move. Then he sighed and pulled his hands from his pockets. "Look, I don't know what you think you found, but this isn't just about you." David narrowed his eyes. "Then what is it about?" The man hesitated. "You don't get it, do you?" He glanced toward David's house. "It's bigger than one guy. You think Daniels is the only one." David felt the air leave his lungs. He had been so focused on Daniels, on protecting Maya from him, that he hadn't stopped to consider something worse. Daniels wasn't working alone. Before David could say anything else, the man took a step back. "Last warning. Drop this before it's too late." Then he turned, got into the car, and drove off. David stood there, frozen, his mind spinning. He had been so sure Daniels was the threat, and he still was. But now he realized Maya wasn't just in danger from one person. There was something bigger happening. Something deeper. And whoever these people were, they weren't just watching. They were waiting. David barely slept that night. Every sound made him jump. Every shadow outside the window felt like a threat. His mind kept replaying the stranger's words. "It's bigger than one guy." If Daniels wasn't acting alone, that meant Maya was caught up in something far more dangerous than he had imagined. By morning, David had made a decision. He wasn't waiting for the police to act. He needed to confront Daniels himself. He drove to the school before Maya's bus arrived. He parked in the lot, heart pounding, and waited. When the familiar yellow bus pulled up, his stomach tightened. He watched as kids got off one by one. Then he saw him, Daniels, sitting in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead, expression unreadable. David didn't wait. He got out of the car and walked straight to the bus. Daniels saw him coming. His face twitched, but he didn't move. David stepped up to the door. "Step outside." For a long moment, Daniels didn't react. Then, slowly, he reached for the lever and opened the doors. David clenched his fists. "I know what you've been doing. I have the footage. The police have it too." Daniels let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "You don't understand." David's anger flared. "Then make me understand." Daniels looked around, as if checking if anyone was watching. Then, in a low voice, he said, "I was trying to protect her." David froze. "What?" Daniels swallowed hard. "You think I was watching her because I wanted to hurt her?" "No. I was watching because they were watching." David's stomach dropped. Daniels leaned in slightly. "She's been marked. They wanted me to take her. I wouldn't do it." David's breath hitched. "Who?" Daniels' hands clenched. "They're everywhere." They find kids who won't be missed. They take them, and no one asks questions. But Maya, he exhaled sharply. She wasn't supposed to be one of them. I tried to keep her safe. David's mind was spinning. Who are they? Before Daniels could answer, a loud crack echoed through the air. A gunshot. Daniels jerked, his body lurching forward. Blood bloomed across his shirt. His eyes widened in shock. David barely had time to react before the second shot rang out. Daniels collapsed. David turned sharply, heart pounding. Across the lot, a black SUV sped off. He only caught a glimpse of the driver, the same man from last night. David ran to Daniels, but it was too late. He was gone. The truth had died with him. The police arrived minutes later. David barely remembered what he told them, something about threats, the footage, the SUV. Officer Reynolds listened carefully, his jaw tight. I'll get a team on this, he said. But David, if Daniels was right, this is bigger than we thought. David looked toward the road where the SUV had disappeared. He already knew that. Maya was safe for now. But someone had wanted her. Someone was still out there. And David wasn't going to stop until he found them. David sat in the police station, his hands still shaking. The coffee in front of him had gone cold, untouched. Officer Reynolds was on the phone, his voice low and serious, probably speaking with someone higher up. The station buzzed with activity, but David felt like he was stuck in slow motion, replaying the last few hours over and over again. Daniels was dead. The only person who seemed to know what was really going on had been silenced before he could say more. That SUV, the man from the night before, they were still out there. And they knew he was getting too close. Reynolds finally hung up and sat across from him. We ran the plates on the SUV. Stolen. David let out a bitter breath. Of course it was. Reynolds rubbed his temples. We're pulling traffic cam footage, but whoever these people are, they know how to cover their tracks. We might not get a clear face. David's jaw tightened. So what now? Reynolds sighed. We investigate. But I need you to understand something, David. This isn't a normal case. This is bigger than one bus driver and one kid. He looked him straight in the eye. You need to lay low. Keep Maya safe. Let us handle this. David shook his head. You think I can just walk away? Someone tried to take my daughter. I know, Reynolds said firmly. And that's exactly why you need to step back. They know you're looking. You got too close, and Daniels paid the price for it. You keep pushing, and you might be next. David wanted to argue, but deep down he knew Reynolds was right. These weren't small-time criminals. These were people with resources, connections. People who could make someone disappear if they wanted to. Still, he couldn't just pretend none of this happened. When he got home that night, Maya was asleep in her room, curled up under her favorite blanket. He sat beside her for a long time, just watching her breathe, his heart heavy with the weight of everything that had almost happened. He had come so close to losing her. He thought about what Daniels had said, they take kids who won't be missed. But Maya wasn't just any kid. She had a father who would burn the world down for her. David made a silent vow. Whoever they weren't going to get another chance. The next few days were quiet. Almost too quiet. No strange cars outside. No more text messages. No signs of the man from the SUV. It almost felt like they had backed off. But David didn't trust it. Instead of letting his guard down, he doubled down. He changed his routine, took different routes when driving Maya to school. He installed extra security cameras, made sure all his digital records were locked down tight. And he kept looking. Even if he had to do it in secret, he wasn't going to stop until he understood exactly what Daniels had been trying to tell him. Then one night he got a call. It was Eric, the school district employee who had helped him pull the bus footage. His voice was low, urgent. David, you need to come to my office. Now. David didn't ask questions. He just grabbed his keys and drove. When he got there, Eric looked pale, nervous. He closed the door behind them and pulled out a flash drive. I found something. David's stomach tightened. What is it? Eric took a shaky breath. It's not just Maya, man. There are other kids. Other bus routes. I went back through months of footage, and there's a pattern. Certain drivers, not just Daniels, stalling before letting kids off. Watching them. Sometimes even changing routes without reason. David felt a chill creep up his spine. How many? Eric swallowed. Too many. David's mind raced. Daniels wasn't lying. This wasn't random. It was bigger than he had imagined. Eric handed him the flash drive. I shouldn't even have this. If anyone finds out I pulled it, he trailed off, fear in his eyes. David nodded. I'll take care of it. That night, he sat in his car, staring at the flash drive in his hand. He could take this to Reynolds, but something told him they would already be 2 steps ahead. The people behind this weren't sloppy. They wouldn't leave a clear trail. But there was one thing they hadn't accounted for. David wasn't just some parent who would back down. He was a father willing to do whatever it took to protect his daughter. And now he had proof that Maya wasn't the only one in danger. He wasn't just fighting for her anymore. He was fighting for all of them.